Hi, I'm Kaiser Serith. Today I'm going to be recommending some books about Vedic religion. First of all, when I say Vedic religion, I'm talking about what also could be called early Hinduism. But there was a change in the ritual structure and in the theology of Hinduism at one point, similar to the difference between, let's say, Judaism and Christianity. So when you talk about Vedism, you're talking about almost a separate religion from what later on became Hinduism. I'm going to only be concerned with the early Vedic period. There's difficulty studying Vedic religion because a lot of the books are old. There's been very few big question books published in recent years, and a lot of them are kind of difficult to get hold of, but I'm going to be recommending ones that I can. Obviously, if you're going to be studying the Vedas, you're going to need a copy of the Rig-Veda. Unfortunately, there is no recent translation of the Rig-Veda into English. The most recent was from the late 19th century. There is currently one in development. I have no idea when it will be published. Could be years. When it eventually is, I'll put that news in the description. As far as the Western languages are concerned, there are translations into French, German, and Russian. The French and the Russian are to a large extent based on the one in German, and that's by Karl Friedrich Geldner. Just called the Rig-Veda. If you can read German, you really should get this book. One warning about it is that he's done a very good job of translating the style. So what he started with was very difficult Sanskrit, ended up with some very difficult German. This was printed in the 50s, although the work was actually done in the 30s. This is the most recent translation into Western language, though. It will come in handy when you are trying to make sense out of some of the other English translations. There's a version of it by Griffith that is in English. It was published in the, like I said, in the late 19th century. It's available on sacredtext.com. There's a link to it in the description. It's not completely reliable, and he does the rather amusing thing of translating some of the more salacious verses into Latin, because in his day all serious scholars knew Latin, so those who were just interested in reading it for pure interest wouldn't be able to read it, but those who are actual scholars would. That's a little bit funny, but it's better than nothing for people who have no access to anything else. There is this particular version. It's by Winnie Doneger O'Flaherty. It's actually only about 1/10 of the Rig-Veda, and it's some scholars really like it, some scholars really hate it, so there's a bit of a controversy over it. But you should still get it because it's easy to find, and it does have 1/10 of the Rig-Veda in it. What I recommend doing, what I've done, is set up a file on your computer of every quotation from the Rig-Veda you run across and just put it in there, even if it's only a few words, even if it's just the title of a deity. You'll find it's very useful. It's also particularly useful when you're trying to compare your translation to Griffith's translation. The other Vedas can also be useful, the most important being the Atharva Veda. Again, there's no recent translation of this one. This is Whitney's translation, which was translated in, let me find the page, 1905, so it's rather old, but again, there's no more recent translation of it. There's also the Yajurveda, which is more from the point of view of the actual sacrificial rituals and the Soma ritual. That's also available at sacredtext.com, and I'll also give the link to that. Besides the Vedas, the most important texts are the Brāhmanas, and the Brāhmanas are descriptions of the rituals with explanations of why they're done. Sometimes these can be kind of boring. Why are there 4 of these? Because the year is 4. And they can be somewhat contradictory. Why are there 6 of these? Because the year is 6. But they also include myths that explain the rituals. Usually the myths actually came after the rituals, but they're still interesting and useful. And they do have good descriptions of the rituals. The most important one, the Śatapatha Brahmana. This is 5 volumes in the translation of the sacred books of the East. It's available from Motala Banandadas. I'll have a link to their website in the description. They've also published a lot of other Vedic books and also more recent Hindu books. The Śatapatha Brahmana is also available on sacredtext.com, so there'll be a link to that as well. This describes largely the Soma ritual, although it does include other rituals like the Ashvamedha and the Pravagya ritual. A little difficult to read, but very much worth it. This is a book, Rigveda Brahmanas, translated by Keith, that includes two other Brahmanas, the Aitareya Brahmana and the Kauṣītaki Brahmana. These are Brahmanas that go along with the Rig-Veda and explain the rituals that are described in the Rig-Veda. Fairly easy to get hold of. Shows up on eBay fairly often for not very much money. This is the Sacrificial Ritual in the Śatapatha Brahmana by Drury. It's a fairly thin book, and it just gives an overview of the ritual that you'll find in the Śatapatha Brahmana. So it's useful as a bit of a summary. It's not very detailed, so for serious research it's a little bit limited, but for beginning or for just referring to from time to time, I find it very useful. You'll run across a lot of technical terms in these books, and sometimes it's hard to keep track of what they mean. So this one here is useful. It's called A Dictionary of the Vedic Rituals by Sen, and it lists the technical terms that are used. It gives them in the Devanagari alphabet, which of course it might be difficult for you to read, but after the Devanagari it has it in the transliterated Roman alphabet version of it. Because it's in the Devanagari, it's in the order of that alphabet, so it might take a little while for you to learn how to use it, but it's definitely worth using. I've learned quite a lot from it and found it very useful. This is the book that you pretty much have to have if you're studying the Vedas. It's called Vedic Mythology by MacDonald. It's organized by deities, and underneath each deity it lists descriptions of them and gives the Vedic references to them all. It can seem a little bit tedious because it'll just like list titles of a deity, for instance, and that can be a bit of a problem, but it's definitely worth it. One problem to warn you about is that at the end of each section he gives interpretations of what this deity was, where they originated and so on, and this has very obsolete scholarship. Most of them he references to being deities connected with nature, particularly with the storm. So just ignore that section. This is very easy to get for a very good price. It shows up on eBay all the time. You can get. I've seen it for $12 in hardcover. One of the last versions to give like a big question of what do the Vedas as a whole talk about is this one, the religion and philosophy of the Veda and Upanishads by Keith, who also translated the Riveda Brahmanas earlier. It's 2 volumes, and it's very detailed. It covers particular deities, it covers the cosmology. There's some very good descriptions in here of the ritual. Again, he has his own interpretations of these. Take them with a grain of salt because the scholarship is somewhat old, but as far as just a summary, it's very useful. A much more recent book is this one, Discovering the Vedas by Friedrich. It is from 2008, so extremely recent. It talks about the Vedas individually and also some of the other texts, the Brahmanas, for instance. It does sections by subject, the mantras, the ritual, the sutras. It also has a fairly large section about the archaeology of where the Vedic peoples came from and how we know that. Friedrich is a respected scholar. It's a fairly easy read. I highly recommend it. In most of the books you read about the Vedic peoples, they'll talk about the Soma ritual, which was the major sacred drink ritual, but there was another sacred drink ritual, the Sura ritual, which is, I think, even more important. I think it's older. You'll see Sura translated as wine, but it's actually not a wine. It's more of a honeyed beer. This particular book here is called Sura, the Liquor and the Vedic Sacrifice by Karl. gives the entire ritual. Actually, there's several versions of the ritual and descriptions, interpretations, and so on. I find this very useful for my own purposes because I'm very interested in Indo-European sacred drink. But if you want to get a different view of what Vedic ritual could look like, besides the emphasis on the Soma ritual you find in the Rig-Veda and most other books on the subject, this is a really good source to look at. This is also a fairly modern one called The Artful Universe, an introduction to the Vedic religious imagination by Mahoney. It's about cosmology, it's about just the view of the world, a lot of discussions about words and how speech worked, about the order of the universe, the Urta. Very good for getting a feel for what the Vedic ideology was like. Highly recommended. Finally, I only have a photocopy of this book. It's the Vedic Ritual by J. Ganda. Anything you run across by Ganda, I recommend getting hold of. He was one of the premier Vedic scholars and writes very well. The subtitle of this one is the Non Solemn Rites. That's because this deals with the rituals that aren't part of the actual the Soma tradition, the sacrifice tradition. This is mostly everyday things you do in your household. It has to do with weddings and funerals. It has to do with keeping your home fires, things like that. So it's a nice balance for the other books, which are mostly not going to deal with this information. As I said, anything by Ganda is good. So those are my recommended books. I'll have a list of them in the description. Again, there's the difficulty that much of this information is old. There is a more recent one, actually, I just remembered, by Michael Witzel on his website, which he discusses the sources of Vedism. I'll have a link to that in the description as well. So good luck if you want to study Vedism. It's quite a big subject. There's quite a lot of information out there. If you have any questions, any comments, please send them to me or put them in the comments section. Thank you. Goodbye.